0.
So you want to build a nuclear weapon? Well, who am I to judge? I'm here to help you make that a reality. Maybe you're arguing with someone over the internet and want to troll him with the force of 1,000 suns. Perhaps you're in pursuit of making your own country and just want a little defense. Or hell, maybe you're just bored. Either way, I'm here to help. Before I give you the deets, let's go over some ground rules here. You cannot make one in your garage. You cannot make one in the lab in your school. You cannot make one alone. You cannot make one with the daily hardware store items. You cannot make one without drawing a lot of attention to yourself. You will need an obscene amount of money that I know you don't have. I mean, if you do, I have a Patreon. You will never even be able to make or get fissile material in the first place. You will never have the means to send this warhead anywhere you want to detonate it. And finally, according to the UN, making one of these bad boys is highly, highly illegal. With those rules covered, you know the risks. Now, let's dive in. You know, I don't know if you've picked up on this or not, but developing a nuclear weapons program is not for the strapped of cash. In fact, it's estimated that the cost of a single warhead is at least $18 million. And that's not even accounting for getting the materials or making the delivery system. So how are we ever going to get our hands on one? Well, I have an idea. Hypothetically speaking, if we all contributed a little bit to the State of the World Patreon, we could pool all the money together and start our very own program. Of course, if you don't have the funds for that, I completely understand. You could always like and subscribe on the video to help the algorithm show this video to even more people, increasing the funds we'll have. Just thought. I called up my good nuclear physicist friend Sergey, and he said if this video gets 1,000 likes and 1,000 subscribers, he'll begin work on a State of the World stand nuclear arsenal. So, what do you say? The first thing you're going to need to develop your very own nuclear weapon is an understanding about how nuclear weapons work. It's really not that complicated. So let's talk about it. When you look at an atom, there are 3 different particles that make it up. You have protons, neutrons, and electrons. Right here in the middle is the nucleus, and this is the important part when it comes to nukes. In this nucleus, you have protons and neutrons that are bound incredibly close to one another. Thanks to Einstein, we know that E equals mc squared, which basically tells us you can get a lot of energy out of a small amount of mass. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Basically, if you can shoot a neutron at one of these atoms, it will split apart, releasing an unimaginable amount of energy in the process. And guess what happens when it splits? It shoots out even more neutrons, causing a chain reaction that ultimately is a nuclear explosion. This is called fission, and it was used in the bombs of Japan and is a key component to modern nuclear weapons. To remember it, just know that fission is when atoms split apart. Because we also know if pressure and heat rise to high enough levels, lighter nuclei will literally fuse together and create heavier nuclei, which releases a ton of energy and neutrons in the process. This is called fusion, because atoms are literally fusing together, and it is also a key component of modern nuclear weapons. Now, weaker bombs, the ones used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, are fission bombs, but are usually just called atomic bombs. Now, the most powerful weapons that exist, you know, your Tsar Bombers and Castle Bravos, probably the reason you clicked on this video in the first place, employ both fission and fusion. These are called thermonuclear or hydrogen bombs, and we'll get to how both are made in a little bit. What's important right now is to know what fission and fusion are, how they work, and how they differ from one another. So what's our next step then? Getting the right materials for the job, more specifically, nuclear fuel. Now, unfortunately, not every element can be used for nuclear fission. In fact, there are really only 2 we can use, and those are uranium and plutonium. With that said, you can't even use all the uranium and plutonium out there, but rather only special isotopes. An isotope is basically the same element, but with a different number of neutrons. The most common ones in weapons are plutonium-239 and uranium-235. Don't get confused by the number, it's literally just the protons plus the neutrons. So yeah, not a big deal. So, let's talk uranium. Uranium is not hard to find. It's about 500 times more common than gold, and there are decent reserves of it in a lot of the major countries in the world. With that said, you don't just mine fissile uranium out of the ground. That means it can do fission, which is what we want. In fact, only about 1% of the world's natural uranium is uranium-235. So, to make the stuff actually usable, we need to take it to a centrifuge and enrich it. How a centrifuge works is that it spins the uranium atoms around super fast. Thanks to this, the heavier atoms hit the wall, while the lighter ones stick to the center. After they spin, we collect the ones on the outside, since these are the nice and heavy atoms that we want. Unfortunately, this is a massive barrier to building the bomb. According to some estimations, a single centrifuge is about $20,000. Considering one centrifuge will never give you enough material, you'll need a few thousand, which is going to rack up to the tens of millions of dollars. Additionally, centrifuges are a huge liability, especially if you're not supposed to have them, which you aren't. Unless you want things like Stuxnet, where they literally sent a digital worm into the Iranian nuclear facility to blow up their centrifuges, maybe stray away from them. So, with all that said, let's talk about plutonium. Plutonium isn't as common as uranium, and when you find it, it'll usually be in very small amounts. However, thanks to a bug the devs haven't patched yet, you can literally get plutonium from leftover uranium in nuclear reactors. With that said, the process in which you get plutonium and separate the atoms just so happens to be stupidly radioactive. So maybe don't try this at home, or ever. It should also be said that technically speaking, you can use any type of isotope of plutonium to make a weapon. It's just that 238 and 239 are the most popular ones. Because of its accessibility and the ease of having enough abundant fissile material, it's considered the most used material in bombs today. But that comes with a drawback. Plutonium poses a greater danger to you when developing the weapon, and because of this, nukes often require much more engineering and take much longer to make. So we've covered getting your fuel, now here comes the fun part, putting it all together. We're going to cover 3 different flavors of nuke for you: gun type, implosion, and thermonuclear. Starting with gun type, this was made most famous by some little boy in Japan. How this works is basically you have a long barrel with 2 separate chunks of uranium on both ends and a conventional explosive. What's important to know about these chunks of uranium here is that neither of them are at critical mass. What that means is that they alone do not have enough material to do fission, but if we somehow shot them at each other, they would become supercritical, which means they can do fission. So, in a gun type, the little explosive in the back shoots one chunk of uranium across the barrel into another. And once they hit each other, we've gone supercritical, which means boom. So with that done, let's go to the implosion type. You may be more familiar with this weapon because it was named after you. Anyways, how an implosion type looks is that basically you have a lot of spheres. Firstly, a neutron initiator. He's important because he's going to be starting the shooting of the neutron that starts the chain reaction. Then the plutonium core to do all the actual fission. Then it's wrapped in a nice big sphere of explosives. How it works is that the sphere of explosives has detonators evenly placed all over its surface. When they go off, the explosion puts immense pressure on that plutonium core, which makes it dense enough to the point where it becomes supercritical. So, now you know the mechanics of 2 very basic fission bombs, but your thirst, it's not quite quenched yet, is it? You need megatons, not kilotons, and boy do I have the option for you. A thermonuclear, or hydrogen bomb, is a bomb that uses both fission and fusion, and boy, is it a little complicated. So let's break it down step by step so you can truly try to understand these little death spikes. The key thing to know about a hydrogen bomb is that it has a primary and a secondary. The job of the primary is to make the conditions just right for the secondary. So let's go over them. A primary is a little sphere with chemical explosives on the outside, a middle layer of plutonium, and an inner layer of deuterium or tritium. Now you might be saying, Liam, what the hell is deuterium or tritium? And I'll say it's literally just hydrogen gas, just a different isotope. Remember, isotopes have different neutrons, but are the same element. So just think of it as hydrogen, don't worry. So what does this sphere do? Basically, the chemical explosives will detonate around the subcritical sphere of plutonium. And with the pressure the explosions make, it'll reach critical mass, which means it's time to boom. So now it's at critical mass. We got to get this reaction rolling, and we do that with a neutron generator. This guy literally shoots neutrons into the core, and if we know anything about that, it means shit is about to get real. Now you might also be saying, what's the point of hydrogen gas then? And I'll tell you, when it gets hot enough in that core, you know, because we're exploding it, that hydrogen will start doing fusion. And guess what that does? Releases even more neutrons. So with the primary done, what does the secondary do? The secondary is also a little sphere, which is basically a uranium sandwich. A uranium sandwich.
You're right.
You have a uranium outer layer, a uranium inner layer, and in between the two is a layer of lithium deuteride, which again is just more hydrogen. What does this sphere do? Basically, thanks to the fact the primary just detonated and a literal nuclear explosion is going on, it's safe to assume it's pretty hot in this warhead. Thanks to the pressure and heat, the hydrogen here is going to begin to fuse. But thanks to this fusion, because remember, when atoms fuse, they shoot out neutrons, we get even more fission. That's right, baby. Thanks to our little uranium sandwich, those neutrons are going to be shooting right into fissile material, causing an even greater yield into the explosion. So, if you're lost, an explosion sparks another explosion that causes atoms to fuse, only making a more powerful explosion. And thanks to that explosion, more atoms begin to fuse, causing even more explosion. So, it's pretty simple to tell, thermonuclear weapons are a little bit complex. With that said, they are literally the most powerful devices ever detonated on the face of the Earth. So if you're looking to really make your mark, this is the way to do it. So now what? You know the different types of nukes, how to get and enrich their fuel, and the primary physics involved in them. But you don't know one last thing. how to get them to your target. It should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways, that a nuke is pretty useless if you can't throw it at someone you want to incinerate. So it shouldn't be a surprise that a lot of time, money, and research have gone toward the delivery of these powerful payloads. The US military has what's known as the nuclear triad, and I'll go over it to show you the 3 most popular options for getting a warhead to its desired target. And yes, before you think about it, you cannot afford any of these. The ICBM is by far, in my opinion, the coolest form of nuclear delivery. What they basically do is they launch out of the safety of your own land, usually deep in an underground silo. Then they absolutely careen up to space at a speed of nearly 15,000 miles per hour. Then, once in suborbital flight, they shoot out their cone of death and it slams toward the Earth, ultimately detonating at the end. These differ from weapons like cruise missiles, since ICBMs are usually only powered for the first half of their flight, and then they let gravity and math do the rest. What's remarkable about ICBMs, and the reason they're so prolific in modern nuclear arsenals, is because you can get a payload anywhere in the world in only half an hour. And I thought Amazon Prime was fast. Hey, thank you, I'll be here all night. Of course, you probably, most likely, cannot build this thing. You're going to need somewhere to store and launch a 60-foot shaft of death, gyroscopes, accelerometers, GPS systems, several rocket stages, and a nuclear warhead that can withstand being slammed into the Earth at 6 miles a second. So this begs the question, can they be stopped? The answer is probably not. The US only has the Ground-Based Mid-Course Defense, or GMD, to stop a nuclear onslaught, and numerous studies have shown that it cannot be relied upon to stop even a limited strike. But let's be real for a minute. A cone that's only a few feet long blistering across the sky at 22,000 miles per hour is going to be very, very hard to stop regardless. However, I'd be a fool not to mention the fact that while your missile's on the ascent though, it is fairly vulnerable to a strike. So you may want to do that somewhere where nobody can reach it at all. But hey, maybe you really aren't feeling like destroying someone across the planet. There are always shorter options with these guys. Perhaps I can interest you in the intermediate range ballistic missile? Maybe the medium range? Perhaps you're a short range kind of person? Dare I say a tactical ballistic missile kind of person? But how much does an ICBM run you back? Dear God. Well, let's say you don't have the space, or the means, or the funds for an ICBM. What else can you do? The SLBM is like an ICBM. It's basically a ballistic missile, but launched underwater from a submarine. How cool is that? The submarine-launched ballistic missile was first pioneered by the bad guys of World War II, but they never got the chance to test it, and then were snatched up by the USA and Russia to make even more weapons. A modern SLBM can go over 3,000 miles, with the longest one, the Trident D5, reaching up to 7.5 thousand miles. Unfortunately, this might be even harder to make than an ICBM, considering you now need a ballistic missile, a nuclear warhead, and, somehow, a ballistic missile submarine. Good luck finding that. But how much will this cost you? Surely cheaper, right? So, if a Triad has 3 parts, what's the last option for delivering our mini-sun? That's right, baby. You can use a bomber. Considering your warhead is only a few hundred pounds of dense radioactive material, you can load this into a strategic bomber and fly him to your destination. It should be said, though, you should be very careful about how high and fast you're flying, especially if using a thermonuclear warhead, because there's a very likely chance you won't make it out of there alive. Overall, the mechanics are pretty simple, though. Plane goes up, bomb is dropped, plane goes back down. So, what do you need for this? I'm too broke for this, man. Anyways, that's how you make a nuclear weapon. You know the steps, you know the moves, now you're ready to go out and have a blast. Just remember, I'm rooting for you. Alright, it's patron shoutout time. Huge thanks to In the Bayou and Zesty for your support over on Patreon. And if you'd like to enjoy all the perks that they receive, check out the link in the top comment. Trust me, it's totally worth it, and you'll be my best friend. Anyways, huge thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to help the channel keep growing, and have a great day.